This video will explain sending and receiving data from a digi scale inside of the RSM program. I have set up this current database for digi to be a fresh store, so it will go through creating the store, adding the departments, setting up the device itself, and making sure that the communication is good for the scale and a RSM program so that we can successfully send and receive data. As you can see here in my command prompt window, I have already tested the scale that I have in the lab with a ping to make sure that I am communicating it from my computer. Looks like I have a successful ping here, so I shouldn't have any issues communicating with the scale using the RSM program. So we'll start by logging into the RSM. Your username and password will be set the way that it needs to be set based on whatever your store setup is, and right now it's the default. And right now it's asking, do I want to run the store wizard? We're going to go ahead and say yes so that we can go through this process on just setting up the store as RSM understands it. So we're going to hit yes here. And now it says the current RSM configuration will be lost. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes, since I've created a new database, we don't have to worry about losing that information. So the store number is going to be 1 because there's just a test lab. And we're going to call it our RSM test lab test store. And that's how we're going to identify it when we swap to this database and from another customer to this one when we're in the lab or on site needing to do some configuration to the data for those scales. We're going to hit OK. It's going to say the number of departments. We're just going to do 1 for now. And we're going to set up department number 1, and we're going to make it our test department. The IP address, as we cited here, is going to be 10.109.100.139. So instead of it going through all of these, we're going to limit it to only search for that IP address, so we don't have to go through it all over again and look at the setups. We're just going to verify again one more time, 10.109.100.139, and that's going to be our scale. And we're going to leave FTP disabled because we don't use that communication with the RSM program. We're going to hit OK. It says it's an invalid IP address. It's probably because it didn't add that extra 0 or that extra period. We're going to hit OK. That's exactly what happened. See, and we're going to see when this store wizard setup for the device setup comes up, we know that it did communicate with this scale, and it's asking for the information of the scale. And we're going to do lab scale here, and we're going to put it into our test department because the scale always has to be in a department for you to access the department. We're going to hit model, and we're going to set it up as the SM5500 series because that's the scale that I'm currently working with. It's an SM5300, but the SM5500 model section will enable communication between all 5000 series. That includes 5100, 5300, 5500, 5300X, the new models that have just recently come out. So we're going to leave it as enabled because we know we want to communicate with it, and we're going to hit OK. Now we have our department list and our device list. We can hit OK because it did show that it has the communication here. We hit OK, and you want to save these changes, we hit yes. So now it's creating the labeled database, which is just a folder that it's creating in the RSM directory. That way when we pull the data back, it'll have somewhere to put that information into. So now that we've saved it, we just go ahead and hit the back key. It's going to bring us to the main menu. From here, we now have a programming section available for the department, but we have no information in here at all. It's an empty store, so we need to pull the data back. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be doing that in the data section for sending and receiving data as per what we need for this individual store. So we're not going to deal with sending to scale at this point. It's all going to be received from scale because it's a brand new scale. So once we select this option, we'll be able to determine what scale we want to pull from in case you have multiple scales and multiple departments. You can set them up and pull the data back as needed. So with this one, we're just going to leave it as selected, and then we're going to pull back all PLUs, all text. We pretty much can just click everything if we needed to get all of the data that we want, but we don't need clerks, we don't need images, we don't need places of origins, we don't need trays, we don't need special messages, sequences, or all messages. The reason being is that all of this data is unique to the scale and the department, but it's usually not applied at the scale level. So we won't pull this back. Now it does have images, but we don't need all that data being pulled back in RSM. It can prevent the other data from being able to be pulled back. Now we may see some errors depending on what is in the scale, and since the RSM program is empty, some fields won't be able to be populated because it needs those fields in RSM for it to function. So we will see what we get when we pull this back. We want to leave it as replace, or we can confirm replacing records. If you did this when you already have PLUs in there, it's going to ask every single time you have a PLU, and if you have like 1,000 PLUs, it will be it'll be pointless because you'll be sitting there for 15 to 20 minutes. You're better off task managing, closing RSM, and restarting, because that's just going to be a big problem. So we go ahead and just automatic replace the existing records. We're going to hit OK, and we'll see what this process looks like. We should see this start to pull the data from the scale. You'll start to see it count if it was properly displaying the information. Right now you're going to see a black bar across the top, and you're going to see the TCP driver not responding. This usually happens when the program is in a non-responsive state, but it's working in the background with this data communication. It usually happens on Windows computers where another application happened to be running a process and it conflicted with the current state of RSM, and we know that it's still functioning as it just cleared here. We're going to come down to the bottom, we're going to click our RSM. As you can see in the display, we know that it is counting. See, and now it says PLU record error. For whatever reason, it can't pull that PLU data. So we're going to hit OK. It was able to process all of the text. It was able to process all of the ingredients, if any are in there. It was able to process all of the formats up to 5069. That's the limitation for RSM. All the text links, all the names. Hopefully all that information has been put into the scale. The shop name was completed. It's usually one message, and then main groups were all completed, including these departments. It looks like some of the information doesn't appear to have correct information in it, so we will see exactly what's going on with that in the main group data. And now it says system maintenance message, restart after lots of changes, as it automatically backs up. You just hit OK. It's just a message that pops up. So now we can look at the data that we got by going back into the programming section. We can see if anything came into the PLU section. Now it does show that we have a bunch of PLUs from this scale. This was a bakery scale for a large chain store, and we were able to pull that data back, and even though it had an error, it could have been a couple PLUs that produced that error, not necessarily the entire listing. So if we go all the way down to the bottom, we may see one down here, but we don't. It looks like it pulled everything, even with that error message, which is typical of RSM. You just have to double check after everything if you ever see those messages. Now we can go in here to ingredient. See, this is showing no ingredients because the ingredients that we were pulling were static ingredients, and the ingredients on the PLUs are going to be built into the PLU section, which you can refer to the programming video to see where that information gets inputted. We're going to check out our texts, and we see that we have a bunch of our texts here that are in the scale and set up, so that's good. And then we're going to check our label design. We have our 6 formats. We can actually just look at the format and see exactly how that format was set up in the scale. Looks like they have a frame here as well, and a couple of other things like the ingredient section and the barcode, and you can see how those formats function. and how they get set up and print information onto the scale. We're going to hit the cancel option here, and we're going to look at the next page. We're just going to take a look at this shop name so that we can see what kind of data was pulled back. We're going to see I have already changed this information for reasons, and it's showing that the data was pulled back correctly. I can assure you that it did, and I changed this information just to be safe. So we go back, and we are pretty safe to assume that this communication went really well. Most of the data that we wanted, if not all of the data we wanted, was pulled back, and we were able to verify that it was. Here's where the ingredients were that I spoke of beforehand, and we see all the different information that this PLU has came back pretty well. So going back into the data section, at this point we would be able to check between the RSM with the synchronize. If we had any information or any issues, we can do this test. We want to keep all existing scale data, and we can hit the send button, and what that's going to do, we want to proceed with the synchronization, and that'll change the information on the scale if anything in RSM was changed. Since we just pulled this data back, we won't have to worry about doing that today. So we're going to go ahead and go back again, and we can see that the send to scale option is now available for us to be able to choose what to do with that information. So if we wanted to change the shop name with the one that I updated, we can hit one shop name, and we can change this one 1 2 3 4. Actually, let's do something else with this. In this video, we're going to go back and we're going to add a shop name to this department so that we don't mess with the one that's currently in the scale. Do you want to create a new one? Yes. We're just going to do a couple of tests. So test, 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 test. It's a good way to make sure everything's okay. So if we hit the save option here, it's going to automatically update the scale, as in the programming section of these training videos explain that whenever you save an option, it will automatically update the scale if it's communicating. See how now it's showing sending data was okay, and it said that device. So now we know that it's in there. So we're going to check this VNC communication where I have the connection to the scale, and caps lock is on, but luckily ours is only numerical at this point, and we can see the scale that I've just now connected to. We can hit the home key here, but it looks like there is no menu option on this, so I'm going to press on the scale, the M and re0 key, to get to the menu for us. We can go into the programming section of the scale, go into PLU related, go into shop name, and we should see that new shop name that we just added to the scale, showing us that we have successful communication to and from the scale for sending and receiving data. These are just a couple of ways that you can verify the communication is good between the device and the program. And within this section of data, you see that these two are the most important out of any of these that we are going to be using primarily. From there, you can properly update a scale or an RSM program as needed.